It was a rainy afternoon in a quiet village, nestled on the outskirts of a bustling city, the kind of place where time seemed to move slowly and life was lived in. The rhythms of nature. People knew each other by name, and secrets were often whispered behind closed doors in this village. There was a story that lingered in the air, whispered by some, with a sense of disbelief, and by others, with an undercurrent of awe. It was a story of love, betrayal, and a dark twist of fate. The protagonist of this strange tale was a young teenager named Tund, who'd grown up in the village, and the woman who would become central to his journey, Beatrix, a 65-year-old woman whose life had been marked by a history of wealth, beauty, and a mysterious loneliness. Tund had always been different from the other boys in the village. While most of his peers spent their days playing football or hanging out at the local market, he was often found sitting by the lake, staring into the distance as if searching for something. Beyond the horizon, he had dreams of leaving the village one day, of experiencing a life that was bigger than what the village could offer. But those dreams seemed distant, and for now he had to settle into the routines of village life. Beatrix, on the other hand, had lived a life that seemed larger than life. Itself a widow for many years, she had inherited a fortune from her late husband, and was known for her beauty and grace even as she aged. Yet despite her wealth and her reputation, there was something cold about Beatrice. People spoke of her as though she were a woman haunted by regrets, someone whose life had been filled with more loneliness than happiness. She was often seen in her grand mansion on the hill, walking alone through the meticulously tended gardens, her eyes always distant, as if searching for something she could never find. It was on one of those rainy afternoons that Tund and Beatrice's paths crossed. Tund had been walking through the village trying to clear his head after a heated argument with his father. He had just turned the corner when he noticed Beatrix sitting on a bench in her garden, staring out at the rain, her face an unreadable mask. There was something about her that drew him in a mix of sadness and strength that was both unsettling and magnetic without. Thinking, Tund approached her. "Are you okay, madame?" he asked gently, his voice soft and respectful. Beatrix looked up, surprised by the sudden appearance of the young boy. For a moment she said nothing, just studying him with sharp, calculating eyes. Then, as if realizing that she had been staring too long, she nodded. "I'm fine." She applied her voice low and almost melancholic. Tund, however, didn't move. He stood there for a while, not quite sure why he felt compelled to stay but unable to walk away. There was a silence between them that felt heavy, as though they were both waiting for something, though neither of them knew exactly what. It was finally Beatrix spoke again. "Do you know why I sit here so often?" She asked, her voice a little more vulnerable. Now Tund shook his head. "It's because this garden reminds me of my youth," Beatrix continued. "It was a time when I believed everything was possible. But as time goes on, you realize that some dreams are never meant to come true, and then you sit here watching the rain, waiting for something or someone." There was a sadness in her words that resonated with Tund. He couldn't explain it, but something in him stirred. Perhaps it was her vulnerability, or perhaps it was their realization that she too felt the weight of lost opportunities. Over the following weeks, Tund began visiting Beatrice. More often. At first, he would come only to talk, sitting with her as she recounted stories of her youth, stories of love, heartbreak, and the lavish life she had once lived. Slowly, Tund became more than just a companion. He became her confidant. Beatrice trusted him in ways she hadn't trusted anyone in years. She shared her deepest regrets, her greatest fears, and her loneliness that never seemed to dissipate, no matter how much money or power she had accumulated over the years. But as time passed, something began to change. What started as a friendship began to blur the lines, and the emotional bond between them deepened in unexpected ways. Tund, young and full of life, had his own desires, his own dreams, and Beatrice, for all her wisdom and experience, found herself drawn to the vitality he brought into her world. She'd never expected this. A connection with someone so young, someone so full of promise and energy. It was intoxicating. And for the first time in years, she felt alive in a way she hadn't thought possible. Their relationship, however, did not go unnoticed. Rumours began to spread in the village. Whispers of an affair between the old woman and the young boy stirred the gossip mill. But the truth was far more complex. There was no physical intimacy. Not at first. The bond between them was one of deep emotional connection. Tom began to see Beatrix in a different light, not just as an older woman who had lived through loss, but as someone who had experienced life in all its fullness. He admired her strength and her intelligence. He admired her ability to keep going, even when the world around her seemed to crumble. But as the connection grew, so did the tension. Beatrice, despite her best efforts to keep things platonic, found herself falling for Toned in ways that she hadn't expected she would. Watch him with longing. In her eyes, the kind of longing that couldn't be expressed with words. She would tell herself that it was just a phase, that it was only a fleeting attraction. But deep down she knew the truth. She was falling in love with a boy who could never love her back in the way she wanted, and Tuntund was torn. He cared for Beatrix deeply, but his heart was drawn to the future, to the life he had always dreamed of. He couldn't let himself be consumed by the past, by the woman who was too caught up in her own memories to live fully in the present. But there were moments, fleeting and intense, when he caught a glimpse of something in Beatrice's eyes, a raw, unspoken desire that shook him to his core. He had never expected to feel this way, to be the object of someone's unrelenting passion, and yet the more he tried to distance himself, the more he found himself drawn back to her. It was on a particularly stormy night that everything came to a head. The rain had been falling for hours, a torrential downpour that seemed to echo the turmoil within Beatrice's heart. She invited Toon to her mansion, a place that felt more like a prison than a home. They sat in the grand sitting room, the only sound, the crackling of the fireplace. Beatrix looked at Tund with a mixture of longing and desperation. "I can't keep pretending," she whispered. "I can't keep denying what I feel. I want you tuned. I need you Tununk." Heart race. He had heard those words before. Maybe not in exactly the same way, but they were words that carried weight. Words that could change everything for a long moment. He said nothing. His mind raced, trying to make sense of everything that had led them to this point. He cared for Beatrix, but he knew he couldn't stay. He couldn't allow himself to be consumed by her, passed by the ghosts that haunted her. "I'm sorry," he said finally, his voice thick with emotion. "I can't be what you want me to be." The words hit Beatrix like a blow, and for the first time, she understood the depth of her loneliness.